We will end the test now and we will stand by for
Sustainable Development Goals. We are all excited that you are here and look forward to engaging discussions. Please note that this forum is bilingual, English and Russian. You can select the language you want to listen to by clicking on the respective interpretation channel. On behalf of our interpreters, I want to inform you that our interpreters will alternate every 20 minutes. Speakers and participants are requested to be mindful of the additional difficulties experienced by interpreters when working in remote mode and of the increased likelihood of disruptions to the audio feed to the interpreters. Only the speech or intervention in the original language is authentic and constitutes an authentic record of the proceedings. In case of any inconsistency between the interpretation and the speech or intervention in the original language, the latter shall prevail. Interpreters serving remote meetings cannot be held liable for interruption of service, pixelation, freezing or loss of visual input, partial or complete loss of audio, audible artifacts, unauthorized access to personnel or confidential data, leaking of information due to inadequate soundproofing, and or data loss. So with this housekeeping announcement out of the way, I now give the floor to our moderator of the opening session, Mr. Nikolai Pomoshnikov, Officer in charge of the ESCAP Sub-Regional Office for North and Central Asia. Mr. Pomoshnikov, over to you.
Thank you very much, Natalia. Dear colleagues, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, it's great pleasure to start today our fourth North and Central Asia Multi-Stakeholder Forum on implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. Usually we have this forum in different countries. We conducted this forum in Almaty. We had this forum in Tbilisi, at excl, and due to COVID situation, we are forced to conduct this forum in virtual mode. Of course, from one point, it creates a lot of difficulties because face-to-face communication is preferable for us, but from other point, it provides new opportunities. It gives opportunity to bring more people, more participants, more partners for the organization of this forum. And this particular forum, we are organizing in close cooperation with our UN partners like UN Women, UNDP, FAO, UNESCO, UNEP, ILO, WHO, and of course in close coordination with resident coordinators and UN country teams in all North and Central Asia countries. So it gives us a very good opportunity to review the situation with implementation of SDGs and to take necessary strategic decisions for Agenda 2030 implementation. And I must tell you that we invited eminent persons to make statements, to participate in this forum. And for the opening ceremony, I'm happy to provide the floor to Under Secretary General of UN and Secretary and Executive Secretary of SCAP, Ms. Armida Alishakbana. So she recorded her message because she is busy with many other engagements. So let's watch her recorded message, please.
Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 4th North and Central Asian Multi-Stakeholder Forum on Implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. COVID-19 has brought an unprecedented health and socio-economic crisis in Asia and the Pacific. Countries in North and Central Asia are exposed to crisis in multiple fronts. These economies, in aggregate, are expected to contract by over 7% economic growth in 2020, causing further widening of socio-economic inequalities, especially among vulnerable groups, including women, children, and older persons. Trade and transport are being impacted largely due to their landlockedness in North and Central Asia. Countries' fiscal space and revenues are also being impacted due to falling oil prices, undermining their prospects for economic and structural transformation. A sharp drop in remittances is further causing loss in incomes and public consumption demand. Ladies and gentlemen, this forum provides a timely opportunity to discuss the recovery strategies in close coordination and multi-stakeholder partnerships with representatives from governments, civil society, business, academia, and youth. Together, governments and all stakeholders need to work in formulating policies across social, economic, and environment sectors to safeguard the delivery of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Allow me to highlight some policy responses for your consideration and further deliberation in this SDG forum. Improve social protection and widen safety nets to include informal, self-employed, and other vulnerable groups. Support resilient supply chain, sustainable trade and investment, and trade digitalization. Strengthen regional connectivity while coordinating transport and trade regulations. Enhance regional monetary and financial coordination. Harness regional cooperation on climate change. SCAP stands ready to work with governments and all stakeholders in designing and advancing SDGs implementation plans. I look forward to listening to your recommendations on the future course of action towards attainment of Sustainable Development Goals and count on your commitment to build back better in North and Central Asia. Thank you.
Our next eminent speaker is with keynote address, His Excellency Mr. Rashid Alimov, Doctor of Political Science and Honorary Professor of Taipei Institute, ex-Secretary General of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So he also pre-recorded his message. Please.
Ваше превосходительство, дамы и господа, для меня большая честь и
Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I am extremely humble to address to the fourth Stakeholders Forum of North and Central Asia on SDGs. The forum is under very difficult period. Within the past months. Our well-known world and business as usual changed dramatically. The reasons are well known. This is due pandemic of COVID-19. The expected economic growth all of a sudden became extremely negative, and economic crisis is underway. The consequences is very difficult to assess yet. Due to the crisis, the accomplishments of the two last decades turn into the big number of unemployment. Unemployment and haltering of labor migration resulted in sharp decrease of remittances, and as a result, the income of many families shrank dramatically. As a result, our goal to uproot poverty is reversed dramatically, and the scenario of recovery is under threat. The international institutions and academia, all of them forecasting significant economic downturn in 2020-2021. What will be the scales of this economic turmoil, we yet don't know, but actually it impact on tourism, banking sector, retail sector, services, micro and small and medium businesses. Mostly hit are the vulnerable groups of population, elders, disabled, women and youth. The efforts of the world governments, of course, give some hope and some results, but we know the results are shortcoming, and we know that recovering of economy is extremely time-consuming process. But we know that every crisis has two sides: negative as a threat, and positive as additional chances and opportunities. Here we have the forum with highly representative audience of stakeholders, which is an excellent platform to discuss all amassed problems which we're currently facing, but we also can together find in the way out and turn around in situation for the sake of sustainable development. The most important thing is to make correct lessons out of this crisis and do something for public health, for food security and other important spheres. The lockdown, of course, significantly limits transfer of people physically and transfer of goods and services as well. That is why we moved online. That is why we've got a lot of streaming platforms. All those spheres received positive impulse because of the lockdown. Yes, the pandemic changed the shape of labor markets, and many people now working as teleworkers, and we've got new vacancies, and we've seen video conferences like others now. As a result, pandemic is a very strong impulse for speeding up digitalization of all spheres in life. Pandemic also is a very difficult test for everyone, but first of all, it is a big test for public health and for doctors and nurses. It is very important to have the government to be really focused on doctors, nurses, and public health sectors in general. They really need to have
личной гигиене и общественной санитарии. Помимо этого,
In addition to that, the pandemic has again drawn people's attention to climate change issues. The quarantine restrictions caused a sharp decline in economic activity, reduced transport links, and decreased use of natural resources, which resulted in better air quality, specifically in industrial cities with high levels of pollution. It's important to preserve the best and the most valuable, and to spread, to roll out and multiply the best of achievements during the first of the fight against the pandemic. This is particularly important for the younger generation who are gaining life and professional experience in times of crisis. In this regard, the upcoming dialogue between eminent people and young people seems to be extremely valuable. The global nature of many challenges of today and opportunities of today go beyond the borders and capabilities of individual countries. Today, we need a collective view of our common future. It's even needed more than ever before. Folk wisdom says, in order to see further, one has to uprise higher. There's no doubt that the forum participants will be able to look beyond the horizon and to see the vector of human development. Let me wish you all success.
Dear participants, we also have a message from another our good partner and eminent participant, Mr. Banban Sasatona, Vice President for Knowledge Management and Sustainable Development of Asian Development Bank. Please.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the invitations to join this sub-regional consultation on human well-being and the SDGs after the COVID-19 crisis. Today, I will discuss building back better and differently together through the SDGs. COVID-19 has highlighted our region's vulnerability to shocks and made achievement of the SDGs even more challenging. Our 2020 ESCAP ADB UNDP report on accelerating transformation for the SDGs explored 6 entry points to help achieve the goals. In today's context of the pandemic, these entry points also present opportunities to effectively build back better after the pandemic, while also charting the course to tackle long-standing developmental challenges. When the pandemic struck, we observed that many countries' initial reactions was to look inwards and close borders. Supply chains were disrupted and regional activities decreased in no time. However, it soon became clear that isolation is not a long-term solution. The pathway to saving lives and securing livelihoods instead lies in cooperating across borders, be it on information sharing, capacity building, or policy coordinations. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, in the regions of North and Central Asia, ADB has been actively supporting such cross-border cooperations through the Central Asia Regional and Economic Cooperation CAREC program. Originally established in 2001, CAREC has grown to a partnership of 11 countries and 6 development partner organizations. With ADB as its secretariat, this program originally started with a focus on transport, trade, and energy connectivity. Almost 20 years on, it has evolved to help member countries deepen cooperations in diverse areas under 5 operational clusters. They are first, economic and financial stability; second, trade, tourism, and economic corridor development; third, infrastructure and economic connectivity; fourth, agriculture and water, and fifth, human development. These 5 clusters of the CAREC 2030 strategy are well aligned with SDGs and are most relevant for the member countries today as they reopen their economy. The effect of the pandemics on their economies have indeed been deep and wide. For example, taking the tourism sector in cluster number 2, a June 2020 report by the CAREC Institute has estimated that the CAREC countries will suffer a loss as high as $5 billion in passenger revenue and 700,000 job losses in the travel and tourism sector this year, compared to a scenario without COVID-19. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, COVID-19 has presented a new urgency for all of us to look closer not only at what more we must do to better integrate the SDGs into development strategies, but also to propel green, inclusive, and resilient recovery from the pandemic. As we reopen our economies, infrastructure investment can be an important part of recovery and stimulus efforts. We also need to sustain policies and financing for clean and renewable energy. This is particularly important in North and Central Asia, where many countries have been working to transform and diversify their economies to reduce dependence on fossil fuels. Let me also emphasize that knowledge sharing is a very important element. A March 2020 CAREC Institute report has summarized the different measures that CAREC countries have taken to respond to the pandemic with the objective to help the countries learn from each other's experience. The report draws comparisons of the country's monetary policies, financial support, and stimulus packages for sectors such as health and education. In November 2019, ADB, UNDP, and Kazakhstan co-hosted the first regional SDG summit for North and Central Asia. The sessions focus on opportunity to support countries achieve the SDGs through policy dialogue, technical assistance, mobilizing public and private finance, and project implementations. Strengthening data management is a critical enabler for such agendas, and ADB is working closely with each member to support digitalizations to this end. ADB will continue to work with partner governments, development partners, civil society, and the private sector to promote more collaborations. The COVID-19 pandemic has really changed the way we work, and indeed, we are working differently. We are meeting today in a virtual format. As you can see here on the screen, the CAREC National Focal Points met virtually just a few months ago and discussed the common approach to building back better. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we continue to innovate and learn from each other, picking up from the many changes we are now experiencing from family and community to work. We must persist in finding ways to keep vital SDG work on track despite unprecedented restrictions on our lives. This will be essential to build back better and together toward achieving the SDGs. In closing, I want to leave this message. We are really strongest when we work together in order for us to bounce forward and not to bounce back toward achieving the SDG. I wish you all productive deliberations. Thank you.
Distinguished participants, for overview presentation on COVID-19 socio-economic impact assessment in North and Central Asia sub-region, I would like to give the floor Ms. Agi Veres, Deputy Director and Deputy Assistant Administrative, Regional Bureau for Europe and CIS countries, UNDP. Please.
Very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants. It's my pleasure to address this forum today and share with you some of the findings, delving into a little bit deeper in terms of the socioeconomic impact of the COVID-19 crisis in the region. As my fellow keynote speakers noted before me, this is a crisis, but it's also an opportunity. And what we have seen is that it has given impetus to many of the governments in the region to speed up some of the response mechanisms and put in place new policy measures. So during my presentation, I would like to share with you the work and the findings of UNDP as part of the UN country teams in the region, supporting socio-economic impact assessments, and then identifying some of the challenges and key findings, but also some of the emerging policy responses that are helping this crisis. So first of all, just looking at the overall COVID situation of the region, if I could please get the slide moving. The overall picture in the region, as the COVID-19 data is showing us, it's relatively favorable compared to other countries and other regions who have been hit very hard by the crisis. At the same time, the data may not show us the full picture, as the testing and the reported cases and the evidence may not be fully available to see the depth of the crisis. So if you look at the next analysis, it's giving us a little bit of a further analysis of what the region could look like. If I can get the next slide, please. Where we can see that essentially, if we're looking at an alternative estimate, looking at some of the data, the COVID-19 cases on the basis of actual deaths, sociological profiles of deceased and their contacts, we can see that the crisis may be a little bit more serious than the original data would look up. Next slide. Then, what is the impact of all of this, and how does the region look like? How bad will the macroeconomic shocks be? If we're looking at the IMF estimates, what we can see is that with the time going, the estimates are getting a little bit more worrisome. You can see in green the projections as of October 2019, and then in yellow the projections as of April 2020. So for example, the IMF is now expecting 12% of GDP decline in Kyrgyzstan, and these forecasts assume a V-shaped recoveries. But at the same time, it will also very much depend on the policy responses put in place by the countries, and also how long the pandemic will prevail. Next slide, please. So in the region, as part of our work within the UN framework, UNDP has supported, together with other agencies, socio-economic impact assessments. And here you can see the account and the status of the countries of the region. As you can see, most countries have embarked on an assessment, and based on that have put in place response plans that are addressing short, medium, and long-term impacts. The assessments are looking at various aspects, but essentially across 5 main areas that the UN framework identifies. First of all, this is a health crisis. So it's about health services and systems during the crisis, as well as on the longer run. Second of all, it's about people. So social protection and basic services are very high on the agenda in terms of addressing the crisis, as people, especially the most vulnerable, have been affected by the crisis. And thirdly, it's an economic response to recovery. Especially small and medium enterprises have been affected largely. And then the macroeconomic response and multilateral collaboration will be very, very important, where the international financial institutions are working closely with the countries, and then across the board to create social cohesion and community resilience. On the next slide, you can see that the socioeconomic assessments have been based on primary data collection in 6 countries, looking at the more vulnerables. There were surveys done and other very detailed and more targeted surveys by UN agencies, for example, household surveys on food security, gender, labor market, and remittances. And there have been quite broad coordination and consultation across various sectors to identify the types of impact, the various degrees of intensity, and dependent on the different vulnerabilities, economic structures, viability of social systems. Next slide, please. So I would like to share with you a few effects of the crisis. So regarding macroeconomic vulnerabilities, there have been significant declines in the GDP, as we have seen from the IMF data, and the economic vulnerabilities are leading also to microeconomic impacts, both at individual, household, and SME level. And these macroeconomic vulnerabilities vary across the countries and vary across what sectors they are impacting. For example, commodity-dependent countries face double shock of lower prices for oil and gas, and then combined with continuing waves of the infection places higher levels of uncertainty and the burdens on public policy and recovery settings. The socioeconomic impact assessments also highlight the disproportionate impacts on vulnerable groups and households, smaller enterprises, and then on uneven geographic distribution between urban and rural areas. So if you look at the first main area of the impact on the next slide, at the household and individual level. Essentially, what we can see here is that the development gains are unwinding. The agency of poverty and rising inequality becomes quite significant. So from an income perspective, increasing unemployment and underemployment is prevalent, approximately 10% higher in urban areas. Reduced income, increasing cost of food supplies, health service costs, utilities, and eroding savings. The majority of households have between 1 and 3 months of savings. And while men may make up a larger percentage of the workforce, what we have also seen is that women are being disproportionately affected in the labor market. We also see the rising levels of income poverty, and then the multidimensional perspective, especially long-term education and health impacts, are also still to be seen on the longer run. The gender impact, as mentioned, disproportionately affecting women and girls, especially because they are part of the unpaid care work, because of school closures and gender-based violence. Inequalities rising in different groups, entrepreneurs, migrant labor and informal workers, and youth and women seem to be bearing greater impact at this level. Moving on to the next big category where we have seen a next big impact is especially on micro, small, and medium enterprises. These are impacted in various ways. First of all, micro and small enterprises, as we see most at risk given low liquidity, indebtedness, and lower average returns, closely followed by some medium returns, and then the impact of costs and negative implications. Most significantly, the supply side shock is disruption to the value chains. There is a larger demand side shocks in particular sectors, as we have seen globally, and in this region it's equally relevant in tourism, hospitality, and the services sectors. The reason why the SMEs are more impacted than other players of the economy is especially because of the high level of informality, own account workers in most countries, which is increasing the vulnerability of the SMEs. Some are adapted to the COVID and recorded some net benefits. As we will see in the policy responses, countries have also put in packages to support them. However, the impact still remains quite high, especially because of the high levels of dependency on support and stimulus packages. The implications of the shock will still to be monitored, especially in terms of the impact and ability to maintain liquidity and support. We also see regional disparities. Informal business in sectors in urban areas are most affected. Then lastly, in terms of looking at if I can get please the next slide. If we are looking at the social protection systems, and here is where we can see the missing middle, the winners and the losers of this crisis. And what we have seen is something quite interesting, as we have this missing middle, mostly about the formerly non-poor informal workers that had no basic security, that have lost their possibilities to earn, but do not properly meet the criteria for the guaranteed minimum income. Then we have the occasional and gig workers, poor people who receive the guaranteed minimum income, but they add to their income levels through occasional work, which now may be lost. Then we have the long-term unemployed who lost the eligibility for accessing unemployment benefits and with less and less possibilities to find jobs as unemployment is increasing. Labor market migrants and seasonal workers who are unable or will face greater difficulties and increased costs to move across borders and earn money. So what we can see here is quite interesting that the poorest layers are covered with some targeted social assistance transfers, the middle and upper middle class employed in the formal economy and covered with social security. So we have this missing layer, this missing middle that's now finding themselves in very difficult situations, and especially the vulnerable groups, women and young people are affected. If I can get the next slide, please. So what have been some of the emerging policy responses? We have seen very good responses also in the region on social protection and insurance. We have seen social assistance schemes, cash transfers and in-kind support, utility and financial obligations waiver and postponements. And many of these measures really helped some of the most vulnerable groups to get through the crisis. Social insurance and labor market wage subsidies that is very much addressing the social protection needs of the most affected. We have also seen, and the recommendations propose even more fiscal and monetary measures, economy incentives. There is a burden sharing with the private sector in many of the countries, business and personal tax eases, loans, capital injections, bankruptcy measures, demand creation measures, and so forth, that will be helping on the long run. If I could get the next slide, please. So in conclusion, when we are looking at this picture, what we have seen is that in many cases, as some of the previous presenters mentioned, COVID was actually an accelerator in response, both in terms of health governance, especially digitalization, putting social measures in place that were not there, experimenting with new policy measures, for example, on basic income and so forth. So if we're looking at the big picture in the region, if economies are to restart and to move out of lockdown with confidence and provide some economic rebound, the role of health governance will need significant support. This is something that on the long run needs reforms, needs capacity building and put in additional resources and ability to respond to the sustained nature of the crisis and potentially second waves as we can now see emerging in other regions as well. Secondly, in terms of the deepening poverty and inequality that is exposing weaknesses in government services and causing rapid reforms or new forms of support to be developed. Human development trends are being reversed and social services adjusting, coming under increasing pressure, in turn potentially affecting social cohesion. So the social services and the social measures put in place are going to be very important on the long run. And when we're looking at the vulnerabilities in economic models and high levels of informality, also are highlighting the vulnerability of the SMEs and the sectors that are facing difficulty returning to pre-existing conditions. New forms of stimulus and economic conditions will be needed to assist the rebounds in 2021. In this regard, this kind of exchange and how the countries learn from each other in terms of the effectiveness of the policy measures will be very important. And lastly, it will affect and it is affecting the debt levels and financial conditions that will remain long-term factors influencing recovery and medium-term development outlook. So in conclusion, I think our discussions today and tomorrow and looking at the support that as the UN and other partners can work hand in hand with the countries of the region will be extremely important across the response mechanism, both in terms of the individual household level for the private sector and the overall macro and microeconomic conditions. With that, thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Ms. Aguiveres, for very comprehensive and informative presentation. I think it will definitely provide a lot of questions and a lot of thoughts how to overcome the crisis situation in North and Central Asia. We come to the end of our opening session, and before going for a brief break for 15 minutes, I would like to give the floor for announcement to Ms. Natalia Wemmer. Please, the floor is yours.
Dear participants, as just mentioned, we will now take a short break and we will be back for session 1, the high-level dialogue with youth on occasion of the United Nations 75th anniversary. And session 1 has the same link that you already joined, so do not log out of the session, just stay on and come back at exactly on the hour, which is 11 a.m. Almaty time. See you in about 20 minutes. Thank you. Sorry, also I would like to add that all presentations and videos will be uploaded onto the webpage of ESCAP, and you have already received the link to it, but we will also share it in the backdrops in the sessions. So you can get all the materials that are presented here. See you for session 1 at 11 o'clock. Thank you. Good morning again. My name is Natalia Wehmer. I'm your MC for this forum, and I want to warmly welcome everybody to session 1 of our forum, the high-level dialogue with youth on occasion of the United Nations 75th anniversary. First of all, some brief housekeeping announcements. Please note that this forum is bilingual in English and Russian, and that you can select the language you want to listen to by clicking on the respective interpretation channel. And on behalf of our interpreters, I want to inform you that our interpreters will alternate every 20 minutes. Speakers and participants are requested to be mindful of the additional difficulties experienced by interpreters when working in remote mode, and of the increased likelihood of disruptions to the audio feed to the interpreters. Only the speech or intervention in the original language is authentic and constitutes an authentic record of the proceedings. In case of any inconsistency between the interpretation and the speech or intervention in the original language, the latter shall prevail. Interpreters serving remote meetings cannot be held liable for interruption of service, pixelation, freezing or loss of visual input, partial or complete loss of audio, audible artifacts, unauthorized access to personnel or confidential data, leaking of information due to inadequate soundproofing, and or data loss. Participants joining us on YouTube live stream can now post questions on the YouTube chat. Our colleagues will select and forward some of your questions to the moderator in the session. Those questions we have no time to answer. We will answer in a summary format in writing later and post this onto our ESCAP webpage. With those housekeeping announcements out of the way, I now would like to introduce Ms. Krista Pikat, our moderator for session 1. Ms. Pikat is the director of the UNESCO Almaty office and UNESCO representative to Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan since 2017. Prior to this, Ms. Pikat has worked in several functions for UNESCO. She holds a master degree in English literature and language and literature, and master degree in development management. Dear Ms. Pikat, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Natalia. Dear participants, distinguished delegates, I'm very pleased to welcome you to this first session of the 4th Sub-Regional SDG Forum that is entitled High-Level Dialogue with Youth on the occasion of the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. As the title indicates, the session contributes to the United Nations 75th anniversary campaign and will take the form of a dialogue between youth and eminent persons from public life in the North and Central Asia sub-region. The session will touch upon building back or building forward better in response to the COVID-19 pandemic by drawing on the expertise and wisdom of these eminent persons who have been at the forefront of social change, as well as by tapping into the creativity, fresh ideas and innovative approaches of some youth representatives. I believe there is no need for me to remind you of the importance of hearing the voices of young women and men in global development discussions. This is the generation that will be the most affected by the decisions that are taken today and over the next few years. And it is also the generation which will be spearheading the change for the better future. The 75th anniversary year of the United Nations has been declared a year of dialogue, when we all come together as a human family to discuss our priorities for a better future for all, by holding extensive discussions and in particular reaching out and listening to youth. Today we conduct this dialogue at the backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic. We already know now that young people are particularly vulnerable to the disruptions of the pandemic that it has caused. And many young people are now at risk of being left behind in education, economic opportunities, as well as health and well-being during what is a crucial stage of their development. But young people have also been at the forefront, responding to the crisis through public health promotion, volunteering, and innovation. So this is why it is important that we recognize that young women and men are the key element in an inclusive recovery and the achievement of sustainable development goals. And it is only natural that we start the related discussions at the sub-regional SDG forum with engagement with youth. However, before we start this exciting dialogue, let us watch the UN campaign video. Could I ask the video to be turned on, please? Thank you. After this inspirational video, I'm glad that we will also have a possibility to hear from His Excellency Mr. Fabrizio Hochschild Drummond, who is a special advisor to the Secretary General on the commemoration of the United Nations 75th anniversary. May I also ask his video greeting to be shown?
Ladies and gentlemen, dear young leaders of today and tomorrow, dear ESCAP colleagues, greetings to all of you. Today, 75 years after the UN's creation, we find ourselves at a pivotal moment in history in which humanity is called upon once again to work together to rise to a new challenge, a global pandemic with devastating social, developmental, and economic consequences. COVID-19 has brought upon us challenges of immense proportions and has uncovered the fragility of our institutions. In practically every aspect, the impact of COVID-19 has resulted in a setback in the implementation of all sustainable development goals. Meanwhile, global megatrends such as climate change and environmental depletion, rising inequality, and the disruption of transformative new technologies are escaping our grasp. We need to step up to the challenge and invent new ways of working, new ways to make our global institutions function and renew our commitment to support the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals worldwide. If we are to secure the welfare of future generations, we need, above all, the support and leadership of young people. We need your strength, your resilience, your solidarity, and above all, your creativity. We need your voices. As we commemorate the UN 75th anniversary, we want to hear from you. We've launched a UN 75 global survey centered on listening to the voice of people around the world and asking them about the future they aspire to, what they see as the biggest threats to that future, and their expectations of international cooperation. Please join the conversation. Take the survey and keep sharing your ideas to better shape our present and our future. I wish you a very fruitful and impactful event.
Dear participants, let us now move on with the introduction of our panelists at our session today. The young people who have agreed to participate in the discussion have actually prepared short video clips about themselves. So let us start by watching them.
Hi everyone, my name is Asyel and I'm 24 years old and I'm from Kyrgyzstan. I'm a feminist and a young activist. I am volunteering since I was 13 years old and I initiated dozens of projects and worked with thousands of young people in my country. Last year, I founded Women's Entrepreneurship Development Fund to reduce economic inequality among the girls and women and to empower them. By today, we covered about 350 women from rural areas on the national level, helped to launch most of their enterprises, and now we are assisting our government to develop a national program on developing women entrepreneurship. Today, only 33% of women are self-employed in my country. Following the COVID-19 crisis, hundreds of women have lost their jobs and many of them are hardly hit by existing inequalities like unequal pay and less access to financial services. We need to move towards a care economy focused on people and on the planet and create measures that value social progress, recognize unpaid care work as a work, and that gives right to social protection, connects to social protection and taxing system to individual rights. I would like to encourage everyone who is listening and all decision makers not to think or say, what can we do for young people, but rather think and say, what can we do in partnership with young people?
Hi, my name is Artem Gersmenko. I'm 34 years old, originally from Moscow, Russia. And I believe that I was invited to take part in this beautiful forum with all these people because all of my work I have been doing for the last 9 years have been connected to the sustainable goals and also the youth issues. Healthy Cities is an independent foundation dedicated to the problem of low physical activity and the shortage of knowledge of how to be active and healthy in the modern urban life. It all started with some projects which I was doing 5 or 6 years ago. They were about involving orphanage in sports and also helping refugees to be more integrated in the society through doing the physical activity with people who live there, who are the habitats. So now we are focused on the research involving Russian architects to understand how their own feeling and understanding of health and activity is connected with the projects that they are doing for other people. We believe we can find something interesting there, which will give us some more tools to communicate to these people and make them think about how their projects affect other people more.
The Kazakh-German University offers quality tertiary education for young people in Central Asia and Kazakhstan. We educate and train skills which are much needed to achieve sustainable societies, new economic order, and without compromising environment. Quality education is our way to strengthen the voice of youth in achieving Agenda 2030 for Central Asia, because well-educated youth is the future we want. This year, more than 80 students from 5 Central Asian countries and Afghanistan participated in the Sustainable Development Goals contest. The winners at the national level got a chance to participate in the regional level of the contest, as well as at the DKU-led International Business School EcoTalk.
Добрый день, меня зовут Хайранов Тофик, мне 22 года. Я родом из Казахстана.
Hello, I'm from Kazakhstan, 22 years old, from Shymkent. So the idea just came to my mind after I just watched certain videos on YouTube and could see the oil leakage and its impact on ecosystem. So I just managed to get some achievements with the support of Kazakh-German University. So I'm just trained in just to be getting to oil leakage locations and to liquidate them. So this meets SDG 6.14. I just really think that the implementation of the project would allow to avoid and remove the effect of oil leakage on ecosystems, including marine ones. Hello, my name is Abdullaeva Hinim. I'm 23, I'm from Tashkent. I'm just a student of Irrigation Mechanization of Agriculture Institute. So we call it Green Roof, and it is communicated with planting high-level buildings, business centers, social houses, and creation of recreation centers and child locations and sites.
6-year-old lawyer and a PhD student from Istanbul, Turkey. I founded an NGO named We Need to Talk, and with my team, we're fighting against period poverty and period stigma.
Through the field projects we're organizing with volunteer doctors, we reach out to women and girls from vulnerable communities in rural areas, and we provide them menstrual products that they cannot afford, inform them about menstruation and self-hygiene, and most importantly, we create a safe environment in which we talk about why periods are nothing to be ashamed of. Our team, consisting of young women, have managed to reach more than 6,000 women and girls in rural Turkey. Period poverty is at the intersection of many SDGs, and we need to talk more about it.
I'm proudly serving as a member of the Beijing Plus 25 Global Youth Task Force.
Led by UN Women, our task force consists of 30 young leaders from youth-led and youth-serving organizations from all over the world. We represent young people with our diversity and expertise from all regions. From indigenous community activists to HIV/AIDS advocates, we support, guide, and advise UN Women in its efforts to place young people at the center of Beijing Plus 25 process and the Generation Equality campaign. We cannot fulfill the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the SDGs without youth getting involved.
So here we are as Youth Task Force, raising youth's voice loud and proud.
Dear participants, let me now move on with the introduction to you of our eminent panelists. The first speaker will be His Excellency Mr. Miras Daulenov, who is the Vice Minister of Education and Science of the Republic of Kazakhstan. He has previously served as a provost or rector of Narikbayev Kazgu University, where he has also been a faculty member of the Department of International Law. He has served as president of the Executive Council of the League of Academic Integrity. He has worked as a lawyer for several law firms in Ust-Kamenogorsk. Mr. Daulenov also serves as a member of the Advisory Council of the Constitutional Council, the Supreme Court of the Republic of Kazakhstan. He's a member of the Executive Council of Asian Society of International Law and a member of the Advisory Council of the CIS Economic Court. He has a doctorate from the University of Wrocław in Poland and has a degree from Amanzhalov East Kazakhstan State University. The second speaker is Toili Kurbanov. In his current role, he provides executive leadership and day-to-day management of UNB. But before joining the UNB, he served as a UNDP country director in Myanmar, and prior to that, as UNDP Deputy Resident Representative in the Pacific Island developing states. Mr. Kurbanov has a master's in public administration from Harvard and a diploma in economics from the Russian Academy of Economics. And last but not least, Ms. Aziza Umarova is the CEO of SmartGov Consulting, which provides advisory services geared towards public sector reform in Eurasia. Aziza's work focuses on public sector innovation, anti-corruption efforts and integrity, e-governance, digital strategy and social policy. Previously, she spent 10 years working with the UNDP, first leading the multi-million governance portfolio in Uzbekistan, and later as an advisor on public sector innovation as the UNDP's Global Center for Public Service Excellence in Singapore. She has cooperated closely with the World Bank, UNFPA, UNICEF, and the OECD. and Ms. Sumarova is a graduate of St. Andrews University in Scotland. So we are now coming to the main part of the session, which is a dialogue in itself. And I will now take a step back as a moderator, and our youth representatives and eminent persons will discuss a little bit among themselves. It would be nice if we also hear about many different issues, so try and keep your answers to a maximum of 2 minutes each time. Artyom, we will start with you. The floor is yours. Over to you. Thank you.
Уважаемая госпожа Пикат, уважаемые участники форума, от имени
Distinguished Madam Pikat, distinguished forum members, on behalf of the Ministry of Education of Kazakhstan and on behalf of myself, I would like to welcome you on this multi-stakeholder forum. In order to access wide access to the education, the Ministry made several steps which resulted in higher quality of education for students. First of all, from September the 1st this year, in a distant forum, education in Kazakhstan started 78% of all students from 1st to 11th grade in all schools of Kazakhstan, and as tertiary education students as well. That is to say, we are continuously providing computers to the educational institutions in Kazakhstan. More than 300,000 computers are provided, and by September 15, more 300 pieces will be provided to educational institutions. It will be given to temporary possession to students and educators, those who are belonging to the so-called vulnerable layers of population. 400,000 pieces of computer equipment provided already, and priority is given, as I said already, to the vulnerable layers of population, more than 500,000 of them currently registered in Kazakhstan. The Ministry of Innovation and Space Industries were also making efforts to provide high internet connections to educational institutions. 380 educational sites in the internet are established for the feedback between educators and the students, which is very important in terms of full-scale distance learning in pandemic times. The students could return back to the recorded lessons, and hence we provided a special online platform, online.edu.kz, for educators where they could exchange best practices with each other. I also would like to point your attention that we also developed a special educational channel, Orleo, where we provided more than 70,000 digital lessons and curricula for various subjects. There we also provided educational schedule, and there we also have feedback channels. More than 500,000 students started educational process based on the request of parents. They educated in schools with all sanitary measures. More than 6.5% of students currently educating in the rural areas. And as a result of additional resource, we are focusing on providing 6,000 tele-lessons, which are developed according to our educational standards. They are broadcasting through Balapan and Yelarna TV channels. These TV lessons will be available through YouTube channels for secondary viewing. More than 190 educators are participating in these projects, and more than 100 lessons are already recorded. In order to provide access for children with special needs, and in particular hearing problems, we provide education, we provide lessons with sign language. We also provide special conditions for children with special needs. More than 160,000 of these children are currently in our country. In order to enhance education for children with special needs in schools, we're providing them with low populated classes with all sanitary measures. Boarding schools are also engaged into this process, where in education process we engaged children from far areas, in rural areas, and other children with special needs. For them, we also provide psychologists. 75 of psychologists are available online for these children in order to provide psychological, pedagogical support for children with special needs in rehabilitation centers. We are providing special hotlines for children and their parents to consult on the specificities of educational process for children with special needs. There we have electronic versions of textbooks for children with impaired visual and hearing abilities. We also provide educational webinars for educators and parents of children with special needs. I also have to mention that in summer period, we are preparing actively for the new educational year, and indeed, our educators made their best in this regard. First of all, they significantly upgraded their digital skills. They learn how to use various digital platforms online, both for secondary schools, colleges, and tertiary educational institutions. The educators also worked actively in terms of developing new educational contents and curricula. I'm very thankful for teachers for these efforts. And once again, I would like to underscore that quality of education significantly depends upon the quality of educators themselves. Under these circumstances, I would like to say that our educators managed to turn around and significantly upgrade their skills in a digital environment. We, as a ministry, providing additional support through developing guidelines and manuals to educators. We also provide significant explanations to educators in terms of how to use new toolkits to digitalize our process of education. Anyway, accessibility and inclusiveness of educations remain our priorities. We are also hearing from our experts, including UNESCO, UNICEF, and other special organizations from the UN family. We also try to be partners in this process of open dialogue in order to accomplish SDGs in these difficult times and secure high quality of education. Of course, under these circumstances, distance learning is incomparable with traditional forms of education. All of us would like to see our children return to schools, but now the situation is different. And that is why under pandemic, we need to provide access, inclusiveness, and quality for our students and educators and their parents as well. Thank you for your attention.
Go ahead. You have to request for the floor and then release your microphone.
Hi, thank you very much for inviting me. And actually, Mr. Dalenov answered the bigger part of the question I wanted to ask him, because what I wanted to know is that how such a progressive country as Kazakhstan in terms of education and digitalization answers the COVID-19 crisis in the lack of digital resources and the low level of readiness of people to study online. But as we can hear, like the hundreds and thousands of computers bought, the courses prepared, and even, which I really liked, the television courses are still in production and they still appear one by one to be accessed by anyone. Like, as I understand, even people who don't have gadgets or computers can watch the lessons on their television, which is more accessible, and that sounds really promising. Only one thing that I would probably want to ask is about motivation. I mean, when you come to the school and you are inside this socializing process, it really gives you the feeling of competition with others, and you don't want to be worse than others. But when you sit at home and just watch the lessons on the TV screen or on the computer, it doesn't work so effective, in my opinion. So could you please put some light on the process of the motivation and how you're gonna score the success of pupils who will continue studying online? Thank you.
Благодарю, Артем, за вопрос.
Thank you, Artyom, for your question. Indeed, for us and practically for all countries of the world who experienced the pandemic was a big challenge to ensure education of children, accessibility and quality of this education. Therefore, what way we selected? So in the past semester of the last academic year, we decided that the access to the education should not be homogeneous. We ensured 4 types of education at each level. First of all, if we're talking about the school level, so this is internet access. Second, for children, specifically for those who live in rural settlements, and who can experience problems with internet, though in effect today in Kazakhstan internet penetrated to every place, though we are talking about the traffic, the speed, internet speed and the images. So we just introducing video lessons. The third one, which was quite well known after the Second World War, which when the countries tried to educate big numbers of population, like through postal services, like in the UK, like it happened in the UK. So we used the postal services. So what we understood was that we cannot depend on one pillar only, meaning on one way only. Second, as far as education quality and how to ensure the quality and scoring, So the first important element is feedback availability. It means motivation system would not develop unless there is a feedback system. And we worked actively on this so that every task, every assignment taken or just done by the student or pupil would get feedback from the teacher, for example. Further on, we continue to work with the platforms. We have numerous platforms in Kazakhstan. So the teachers and professors can just describe their or provide their feedback there. We also reviewing the system of scoring. That means the system of scoring, which was traditionally well known in school format, has fixed its niche. However, the distance in the era of distance learning, we have to improve the scoring system. And of course, we are working on its transformation. And third, very important issue, irrespectively of the fact that many people stay at home. And for many children, for example, it's quite difficult, even with availability of internet, to put oneself together and to get education. We considered a possibility for students of higher education institutions to go to their hostels and just while staying in hostels, not going to the university campus. So just to get this education. So, for example, a person from far remote area in Kazakhstan so can go to their hostels, and 15,000 students used that opportunity already. They just, from rural areas, they just came to their hostels, they keep social distance with the lowest tenancy of rooms possible. But when they stay in hostels, but they just can access to all facilities of universities, including library and high-speed internet, which is available in the hostel. And that possibility was provided not only to those who face problems with internet, but to those who feel that for him or her, it is better to stay in some academic media environment and to get out of their houses. And we provided that possibility. In addition, so we just worked with parents so that parents would understand that remote or distance learning is not just to provide a pupil or a student with a computer, just to sit him or her just before the computer or screen and to say just learn or study. But this should be created through the environment, home environment, so that people would just understand the value of education. I would like to focus on the fact that the work was done, and we are going to work further on feedback, on its improvement, and on improvement of scoring system. Thank you.
Спасибо вам, господин вице-министр. Я думаю, что у вас тоже есть один вопрос к
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Minister. I think you have one question to representatives of the youth. Yes, I would like to ask a question to Asil. Asil Kubanычbekov. Of course, COVID had serious impact on Central Asian economies, not only on them, but on many countries. And out of certain issues of gender equality, according to recent studies, that situation impacted women to more extent than men. As a young activist in women empowerment, what were the restrictions and barriers for constraints for women during COVID-19 epidemics, and what should be done by the government for women to just to provide measures to the women to achieve SDGs during pandemic or after pandemic? So I think the question is understandable for you, and so I would appreciate your feedback.
Push the button and then release the microphone so that we can see and hear you.
Добрый день. Спасибо большое, господин.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Mr. Daulena, for your question. Yes, this is rather topical. As you mentioned, that COVID-19 had more impact on the inequality of women in the society. And as we heard in the early morning from the presentation, that to most extent, so SMEs suffered and self-employed suffered to the most extent. As we know that the majority of them are women. And in my reply, I would like just to answer your question as per challenges and opportunities. So during the pandemic, I just implemented the so-called typical caravan project to train women in e-commerce and new digital tools in their entrepreneurship. And so I would like just to tell what challenges and opportunities were and what could be done to improve the situation and to use the opportunities that could arise today, could emerge today. First, all women mentioned that they had food for thought. And that was to accelerate access or entry to digital world, to digital platform, which would allow to make it cheaper and to expand the entry to new markets through their entrepreneurship activities, and thus finding new partners and new customers. But in order to implement all this, as we know, it is necessary to facilitate training of skills necessary for the new market after COVID-19 pandemic. And this education is needed for all ages, specifically of that of women, like 30 plus, 40 plus, who have to be ready for the new market situation and new activities. And information provision is really, timely information provision is important, so that they would have this information as per access to technologies. And quite important and topical is to improve vocational training, additional training, professional, specifically for young and women in entrepreneurship activities and business, specifically in the field of e-commerce, digital tools, financial approaches, and so on and so forth. And secondly, I would like to say that in your presentation, you mentioned intervention. You mentioned that the government of Kazakhstan worked actively to ensure access to educational resources. And I would like to draw your attention to the fact that today we need to talk about new topic, proper and quality education for the new market. So just to keep it in mind for what market we are going to prepare people. And I think we have to take into consideration specific needs and the situation faced by our women, and to focus on combating on stereotyped allocation of professions. Probably you know that so there are like 400 of professions that are not allowed for women, and we have to think about training new specialists who can work with technologies, who can increase and improve, enhance economic activities of women. And the last thing I would like to say that in some countries, civil society is quite actively operating and functioning, but the situation so provides some women encounter certain difficulties, like in access to information and education, and many civil society organizations work actively in this regard, in this field. And it's important for the government and the particular Ministry of Education to cooperate and to support the organizations that support women and their empowerment in our country. So I just try to provide brief answer to your question because we are limited in terms of time. Thank you for your reply and for the recommendations. That's really valuable for us. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Daulenov. Thank you very much. And if you allow me, I would like to take this chance and to ask question to Ms. Aziza Umarova.
Наших спикерок на данной встрече. И
I'm very glad, Aziza, that you're one of the speakers at this forum. And on Madam Vera's presentation, I also would like to have a question there. First of all, the foreign debt of Kyrgyzstan is about 60% of GDP. And in the presentation, we just heard that because of COVID-19, Kyrgyz GDP would go down by 12%, and the most contribution to GDP is usually done by the service sector, but this sector is severely hit by COVID-19. And as it was mentioned in the presentation, women are mostly employed in the servicing sector. I think under these circumstances, we could see threats and new opportunities, and hence we could set up new goals and draft a new approach and strategy which would give us a chance to build a human-oriented economy for the sake of SDGs, in particular number 8. And now I would like to ask you, Aziza, as an expert who has experience in working with Kyrgyzstan, could you tell us about what innovation approaches are needed in order to stimulate new developments in economy in order to promote the positive attitude to environment and gender approach? Thank you. Aziza, back to you. Thank you very much for your question, Asel. First of all, I would like to say that there are no unique recipes exclusively developed for Kyrgyzstan. These recipes are rather applicable to other countries facing a pandemic. Several blocks we have to mention. First is social protection. We understand that those families which are mostly vulnerable, these are children and women who are suffering the most in these families which are left without income sources. That is why government has to think about new measures and approaches to support these families, and this support should be targeted. That means that the social block is the most important there. Next is development of SMEs. Why? Because big companies are always supported, and many governments provided support to the big companies in their respective states. However, SMEs are mostly left alone facing the COVID-19 circumstances. Those SMEs which are providing services and retail services in particular are left without support in most instances. I believe that the global world depression of 1930s, where businesses were hard hit by the crisis and depression, and the policy chosen during the depression time focused on isolation, closing borders, limiting government spendings, and unfortunately this resulted to a very bad results. That is why I believe here, under these circumstances, we need to lift customs duties, open our borders, in other words, to promote sustainable trade, and movement of goods and services. Humanitarian policy should be also changed in terms of providing support, financial support to the SMEs, providing soft loans to them, especially those SMEs where women are the promoters and at the helm of these businesses. So in other words, we are currently communicating through electronic systems. Many businesses turn to electronic businesses, and Zoom, for instance, is one of the most beneficiary of these new circumstances, and it costs now even more than some well-known air carriers. Broadband internet is also very important condition for development under the circumstances of pandemic. Service economy should rely on electronic platforms, and of course for this and for their sustainable operations, broadband internet is a must. This, in a nutshell, my thoughts about your question. And now I would like to ask Hilola. Hilola, you are a student of Tashkent University of Engineers in the sphere of irrigation and environmental studies. Based on your view, could you tell us, please, what are the most worrisome issues for the Central Asian community, for the Central Asian civil campaigners in the sphere of environmental protection specifically? What are your priorities? What are the priorities in this area for the youth in general, and how young people and government could join their forces to solve these current issues? Hilola, I turn the mic to you. Good afternoon, and thank you for your question. I first of all would like to say that we have two priorities. First, and very important, is lack of drinking water, not only drinking, but just water in general in Central Asia. For instance, Uzbekistan is suffering because of deficit of water, and we need to somehow tackle this issue. And the second point is recycling of solid wastes, which is very important for environment. And I believe as campaigners, civil campaigners, we have to solve somehow these issues for the sake of water conservation and environment in general. How we could tackle these issues? For instance, we could find new approaches in irrigation. We need to, while building up irrigation systems, designing them, have to think about reducing greenhouse effect. And the new environmental approaches would help us to develop more environmentally friendly irrigation systems. For instance, with the support of the United Nations, Salvation of the Aral Sea project is ongoing, and new environmentally friendly irrigation techniques are being tested. We as young people, together with the government, have to find solutions for proper water management. Now I'm talking about domestic solid waste, which is another problem for our cities. First of all, there we need to sort out our waste in order to provide opportunities for recycling different types of waste. Waste are not garbage. Waste are valuable resources, specifically when we are talking about domestic solid waste. And I also would like to ask a question regarding green roofs. This project is about providing greenery in the rooftops in cities. This project should be broadening up in scale. And in particular, this gives us opportunity as young people to be engaged. And now I would like to give a floor to the next speaker, please. Mr. Toly Kurbanov.
Thank you very much, Krista. Хилола, большое спасибо за ваш вопрос. Во-первых, поздравляю вас.
Hilola, many thanks for your question. First of all, I would like to congratulate you with your endeavor. We heard much about Green Roofs project in Hamburg, Singapore, and other places, and it is very pleased. I'm very pleased to hear about this project, which had been launched in Central Asia. Apart from Carlson, who lives on the rooftop, we haven't heard much about roofs in Central Asia. But I believe that roofs are very important environmentally wise. UMV is focused on environmental project. We are focusing on engaging volunteers, and we have many UN family organizations dealing with youth. That is why no wonder that my organization also engaged young volunteers into the UN projects. And if you enhance and broaden up cooperation with the UN family organizations in your home state, that means that we will also give you support in terms of recruiting volunteers. Volunteers are very important for the youth because that is a channel where young people could participate in developing very important projects. Because we are talking about volunteers in Central Asia, I would like to refer to Kazakh experience. You mentioned UNDP. UNDP is operating all over Central Asia. In Kazakhstan, UNDP is quite active in terms of recruiting volunteers into household issues solutions. And that is why, Hilola, if you are interested in, we could help you to contact with your peer volunteers in Kazakhstan. And Kazakh volunteers, Kazakh youth, of course, will be very interested in your experience, including Green Roof project. In Uzbekistan, we noticed a very significant uptick in volunteer services. We adopted a special law on volunteer services. In Karakol, Pakistan, volunteers were very and are very active in combating COVID-19. Yesterday there was the Independence Day of Uzbekistan, and I would like to congratulate you and all your fellow volunteers in your country. I wish you all success of very wise and hard laboring Uzbek people. Now I would like
is online. I thought, Elida, your video was outstanding, and I just wanted to follow up on your video presentation at the start and probe a bit more on your work on women empowerment. The work seems to be closely related to the Sustainable Development Goals, and clearly, no SDG would be ever achieved without women's empowerment. That said, Elida, have the goals provided you with better tools to promote women empowerment in Turkey? If so, then how? And if not, then why not? Over to you. Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much for your question, Mr. Kurbanov. Actually, my work in Turkey on gender equality has focused on two areas. One is legal advocacy regarding gender-based violence, and the other one is fighting against period poverty and the taboo culture around menstruation. And for both, the SDGs and the Agenda 2030, they've been my guiding framework, basically. Particularly while preparing policy papers or a national report, or just simply determining my mission and vision and long-term goals, especially the targets under each sustainable development goal has been really helpful for me to kind of determine concrete, doable agendas for the work I do. Actually, some might disagree, but I believe the vision that SDGs give is the biggest tool above all. So they provide you a framework, they give you concrete targets and a deadline, 2030. But it also provides you some space to kind of find creative ways to reach that goal. And I also believe two things come into prominence. One is I try to internalize one of the core values to the SDGs and 2030 agenda, and it's my favorite slogan ever, leaving no one behind. It's a transformative promise, and I believe everyone who works with socio-economic justice and vulnerable communities should keep that in mind and revisit the core value. And the second important thing is, and the most important tool that it has given me as a vision, is the interconnectedness of SDGs. So they really complete each other and they work together. For example, I work on rural women and I work with rural women and girls and their access to menstrual products, right? So I have to combine SDG 5 on gender equality as my foundation. I have to put SDG 6 on sanitation into perspective. I also have to think about SDG 1 because it's a poverty issue. And in order to reach my goal, I need to build strong partnerships, and therefore I need to visit SDG 17. So as you see, the SDGs support my work and make it possible to have a multidimensional approach. And the vision and guidance it gives is the biggest tool for me after all.
Thank you.
I hope my reply was proper, and I would like to use the opportunity here to ask Ms. Umarova a question. Ms. Umarova, first of all, thank you so much for being a wonderful role model for younger women. And my question is as following. The development of e-governance plays a very important role in empowering women and ensuring gender equality, as you know. For example, I'm a young woman living in Turkey, and I have easy access to internet whenever and wherever. And having access to public services with just a few clicks have made my life so much easier. Plus, during COVID-19, digitalization in every aspect is not really a choice, it's kind of an obligation. But I can't help but wonder whether e-governance is as convenient as elderly women living in remote rural areas. I think the current development of e-governance still does not consider the different access to technologies and knowledge, and their different impacts on men and women, basically. So what do you think should be done, especially by young activists who contribute to building the potential of using this tool to empower women more?
Iliada, thank you. Absolutely right. Unfortunately, in many instances, we see that women are lagging behind. And I would suggest that we have to think about three very important ingredients in bridging the gap. First of all, it's about, again, broadband internet. We need the fixed internet connectivity that will bring the cost of megabytes to the lowest possible, to enable spread of internet and connectivity across the countries, including very remote rural areas. That's first, and it's very important factor. The second is digital divide. We have to train women to use ICT tools, to be able to be well versed in internet, to access websites, to learn new applications. And for that, we or the governments should make an effort. This also applies to age generation that is not very familiar with ICT as well. So again, it's about reducing the divide that we can observe among generations, between men and women, between urban and rural, to make people much more advanced in terms of using and reaping the benefits of connectivity and internet and e-government, because e-government at the core, again, is the same services but online. So that's very important too. So the broadband connectivity across the country, bridging the gap between men and women and digital divide. But third is also important. We have to reimagine the way we are providing government services to people. And that's where we have to utilize things like design thinking, because we have to completely overhaul the process of providing services to make it much more human-centric. So human-centric design is the key. And I will bring example a bit later. And it's also important to think about user experience, right? Exactly like we're using our mobile phones, like iPhones, right? And somebody works on how to make it much more accessible to people and easy to navigate. The same should be done for online services. Imagine if you are approaching like TikTok registration or Facebook, the way some governments are doing with regard to services. They will ask you to bring your picture and send the, download the PDF file and sign it and, send it back. So you will actually never want to go and, use Facebook or use TikTok or Instagram or any other platforms, because that's not the way you like it to be done, right? So that's about bringing the level of user friendliness of government services to the level of all other applications that we are using with the banks, with the transportation companies, when they would like to get ourselves tickets for airplanes. We never do what we are doing with the government services. It's much, much more fun and it's easier. So design thinking could be, I think, great example. For example, in Estonia. Estonia is a very small country, and they are aggressively using ICT to make services accessible to people who are holders of Estonian passports, both in Estonia and outside. And for example, when you're approaching your retirement age, you will get an SMS that will actually ask you, I think as per our record, so government is writing to people, you will be, retiring soon. Do you want to make an appointment with us? So they basically remind people that it's time to go and register with the government authorities. But then it's very easy to respond yes or no. And if yes, basically follow up with the time. I think it's a brilliant example. We can learn a lot to be able to do the same in our region of Central Asia, North Asia. And I believe that the future is with some more creativity in terms of providing services. It should be much more agile and nimble from the government side, and women should be forcefully brought forward to be able to use and reap benefits of it. Thank you very much, Iliada, for your fantastic work. I was also impressed with your video. Thank you very much for your question. Now I would like to utilize this opportunity to ask question from Artem Gerasimenko from Moscow. Artem?
No. Aziza, hi. Yeah, I'm ready. I'm all here to answer your question. Please go on.
Fantastic. Artem, I was impressed with your bio as well. You founded the Healthy Cities Foundation. And as I know, Healthy Cities, the concept is about how cities can constantly improve the social and physical environments, right? And I'm curious, what would be your take with regards to urbanities and how things changed during the COVID-19? Did you see any particular trends and patterns that emerge that either put in advantage position the concept of healthy cities, or at the contrary, make them vulnerable? So what's your view? What's happening in pandemic with healthy cities, and what could be done more by government, businesses, NGOs, social activists like yourself to improve situation? Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you for this question. It's very big and complicated. I will try to answer as much as I can. So first of all, I was really impressed how the topic of healthy cities rised in the agenda because of the COVID-19. Actually, the problem itself is highlighted for like more than 20 years now. And a lot of different recommendations and guidelines and other documents, even issued by United Nations or World Health Organizations, that recommend to make different interventions into the modern cities to make them more healthy, both in the physical and mental and also social spheres. But after the whole world was struck by this spring's pandemic situation, it all became something like common knowledge, like common awareness of, okay, we need to change anything. And I cannot say that there were some like universal understanding of what should be done to change the situation, because it really differs from the city to the city and from the country to the country. Of course, there are some very general problems, and they sound like, first of all, the lack of physical activity caused by the way the modern life works. Like people sit a lot, they don't move a lot, they use lots of private cars to move around the city and between the cities. And that causes the heart disease and other disease. And second big reason is the unhealthy dietary, which caused by the huge amount of production and caused by the problem of accessible street food, which and accessible food in general, which is also a big and huge problem in the many countries. People just don't have money to buy vegetables and fruits. Moreover, they don't have the habit to eat this every day, even if they have money. So it's all connected and creates this cycle that repeats itself. And of course, both of the problems can be solved by from both sides by upper down initiatives and also the rooted initiatives. And what the governments can do, they should create policies, they should invest in infrastructure that helps people to live a healthier life, to be aware of how much they move and how much the way they live affects their health and the length of their lives. But also the people from the upper, from the initiatives that are rooted in the society should be involved into rising awareness around them. And I think one of the points where people can start is collecting data, because the high quality data from the very low level from the beginning is a huge problem. The government on the top just don't have sometimes don't have a proper tools to see what's going on the very starting level. So that's what activists can start with. Yeah, I hope I answered some part of your question, but I think I'm out of the time of my answer.
Thank you very much. And absolutely, and just linking to the previous question about IT, the data could be also collected by crowdsourcing, right? By just asking people to tap on the phones, and you don't need to have hefty architecture of people going and collecting this anymore for the government. It can be done by citizens itself. Thank you very much. Artem, over to you.
Data is the king. Yeah, thank you. And yeah, it seems I have now a great opportunity to ask Mr. Kurbanov a question that really worries me, and I'm really interested in volunteering activities, which can significantly improve life of the communities. As I understand it, as I can see during the pandemic, it was a huge rise in people will and initiative in participating in different initiatives, and the people want to change the situation and they want to help others. I've seen many people trying to be involved in solving this crisis and moving it out of the normal life. And as an urbanist, I'm attracted to the possibility of additional resources. So Tolik, could you please share your experience of increasing people's knowledge about volunteering and give us some big picture on how to encourage them to make change in the situation that are like separated from crisis? I mean, in the normal life, how to make people more active in volunteering?
Toili, can I just use my power as moderator and remind everybody that we are a little bit behind the schedule. So let's now do the second round with very, very short and succinct answers. So thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Krista. Thanks, Artem, for your question. I think there is a special character to having conversation about volunteering in North and Central Asia. And that's the simple fact that whereas in the rest of the world, in their own languages, they usually use an adaptation of the word volunteer to describe the concept in their own language. Here in the region, we have the word volunteer present in every language. In Russian, we say dobrovolчество. In Georgian, they say mokhalise. In Azerbaijan, they say konulu, Armenian, kamavor. By the way, if there are Armenian, Azerbaijani, and Georgian colleagues here, I want to please ask for your forgiveness for mispronouncing the names. In Central Asia, there is a concept known as asar in Kazakhstan, hashar in Tajikistan, and in Uzbekistan. So in a way, volunteerism is embedded in the cultural DNA of the Central Asians, the people in the South Caucasus, in Russia, and in the Northern Asia. In that sense, there is no need per se to increase awareness of the volunteering. What I believe we need to do is to create enabling environment for volunteering movement, volunteering action in the Northern and Central Asia by adopting enabling laws, regulations, by supporting volunteer management organizations, by making sure that volunteers are not used by way of cheap labor, but they're accorded minimal rights, trained, well coordinated, rewarded, and recognized. And also what we need to do is to ground the volunteer movement in the 21st century in the data context. I was listening to the conversation between you and Aziz, and I felt I was among soulmates. In the 21st century, as they say, in God we trust, but everybody else comes with their data. Or talking about our own cultural code, if you remember from служебный роман, товарищ Новосельцев говорил, если бы не было статистики, мы бы даже не подозревали, как хорошо мы работаем. But on a serious note,
statistics, we could not even realize how good we were.
To create an environment whereby the policymakers, the private sector, will be making their decisions about volunteering action, supporting volunteer action in a very informed and evidence-based fashion. I think the glass is half full. We've had the Year of Volunteers celebrated in Russia 2 years ago, which drew a lot of attention to the volunteer movement. We have right now the Year of Volunteer marked in Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan, and I do hope that with that growing attention of the policymakers of the private sector, the region will be able to pull it off and give for the volunteering action not just leverage or just reference in the cultural code, but also a modern meaning that is characteristic and relevant for the 21st century. Thank you. And I guess, Tom, now, if that's okay, since we're pressed for time, I will just move on to ask a question of Asel. Asel, you're working on civic engagement in Kyrgyzstan. And in the UNV, in the UN, we promote volunteer action. From your experience, are civic engagement and volunteering synonymous? How are they different and how they're similar, how they might be complementary to each other? Thank you.
Спасибо большое, господин Курбанов, за ваш вопрос. Если позволите, я продолжу на русском.
I thank Mr. Kurbanov for your question very briefly. Indeed, I don't think there are differences or similarities between civil activities and volunteering. Volunteering is a foundation for civic involvement based on what we had in Kyrgyzstan during the lockdown. All people became really active. The volunteers rank significantly expanded, and every people wanted to support each other. And further on, the volunteers became very actively involved in terms of establishing their own civic organizations aimed at improvement in state politics in order to make these changes more system-like and sustainable. No difference, answering shortly to your question, between civic activities and volunteering. They are both associated with civic engagement. COVID-19 gave a very big impetus to volunteering, and I hope it will be sustainable in Kyrgyzstan further on. Thank you. Also, I would like to continue our dialogue, and I would like to give a question to Dauren. Daulenov, you spoke much about what had been done in Kazakhstan in the educational sphere through the prism of new technologies, but we know the main UN motto, "No one left behind," which are now even more relevant in view of COVID-19. In Kyrgyzstan, there are big differences, for instance, between students in rural and urban areas, especially in rural areas. This gap is really noticeable, and girls especially are vulnerable because of unstable internet connection. Stable internet is very important for proper education. In pandemic times, we noticed that business communities started become very much helpful for the government in this regard. I think this is just the start, but I would like to hear from you as a representative of the Kazakh Educational Ministry. What do you think we need to do in order to bridge the gap and no one leave behind? Thank you. Thank you, Asel, for a good question. I would like to underscore, if we're talking about school students. In order to improve these inequalities, we launched two scenarios. First, if we are talking about small rural schools with a small number of students, they continue their education in traditional offline format because of the problems with the internet, and that this scenario would not be relevant. They will continue their education as usual. And many schools in rural areas, many small schools in these areas are using these opportunities now. Second scenario, when at the request of parents, students may continue traditional offline education, not in rural but in urban schools as well. And about 500,000 students use these opportunities out of 2 million. That's an approach and no one leave behind in educational process. As far as universities are concerned, I already said that we gave students opportunities who have no access to the internet due to their remotedness to come to universities and campuses and use these opportunities while staying at dormitories. Now, what we could do in order to bridge this inequality gap, which is relevant not only for Central Asia, of course. That is through dialogue between society and business, state and business, and secondly, of course, strengthening internet connection, expanding internet coverage to let every student receive free of charge information and educational lessons. So in this regard, we had a contract with Kazakh Telecom that Kazakh educational resources would be provided free of charge, and traffic used for education will be free of charge as well. So this was one of the approach. It is very important to think about technical support of this process because without this technical support, they will remain inequality. Using this opportunity, I would also ask the question to Doughty. Elida,
generations. So everyone can most effectively contribute to implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. Elida?
Elida, you will need to request the floor again. I understand Elida has some difficulties, so let us give her a couple of minutes to reconnect.
My apologies. I had a small connection problem. I do apologize. I'm so sorry. Mr. Darlinov, I heard your question, however, and I can answer now. Thank you for your very important question. Actually, this exact dialogue that we are having as youth representatives with eminent persons like you is a perfect example of efficient intergenerational dialogue. And the millennial generation that I'm a part of, and Generation Z, we are and we will be the most affected by decisions taken now. But the thing is, we realistically cannot fulfill the SDGs without active involvement of young people. And I'm not talking about a symbolic involvement of youth, just sprinkled into conferences and meetings for representation. I'm just talking about providing a place for young people at the tables in which decisions are being taken. I'm talking about more young people in parliaments, more young people in local governments, not as note takers, not as interns, as strong stakeholders who take the floor and who are listened to. The generation older than us, you have more experience, more power, more resources, but we have dynamism and enthusiasm. And so we actually have all the ingredients, we just have to mix and cook. We simply need effective communication and dialogue. Half of the world's population is under 30. Without having half of the world on the table, without all generations being in this together, we simply can't reach our goals. And for that, we need representation of more young people in decision taking.
Thank you, Elida.
I hope my reply was poor, and once again, apologies for the connection problem. And now I would like to use the floor to ask a question to Artem. Artem, I was wondering, I describe myself as a struggling millennial living in the mega city of Istanbul. And where I live, the major urban areas, they have been historically designed by men for men. So clearly, urban planning has a gender aspect to it, and young women from vulnerable communities, they often experience inequality more in urban areas disproportionately. For example, unsafe public transportation is just one example that comes to my mind. And urban space clearly determines how we live, how we organize our lives. So I was wondering, because you are an expert, how we can create more gender inclusive cities. Could you share some of your ideas and examples, good practices from your region?
Thank you for the question, Elida. I want to say that Istanbul is not the only city in the world meeting this problem. And actually, most of the cities are affected by some kind of this inequity, gender inequity in terms of safety on the streets. And the dialogue on this issue exists, and some really good methodologies to solve this problem were developed during I think some of them have been issued in the last 10 years. And they all say that there's no like universal measure, universal interventions to be done like everywhere. One recipe doesn't work, doesn't fit all. But in any place, in any city, in any area which is affected by this problem, the first step that should be done is establishing the discussing round, like some kind of temporary, probably community to discuss this problem and to figure out what actually are the reasons of unsafety. And after the reasons are found out, the aim to solve this problem should be declared, and the different stakeholders should be involved. And the next stage, the next step is a research that helps to understand the different aspects of this problem to design the decision to solve this problem. Then the implementation goes, and at the same time, the parallel track should be advocacy and awareness rising. Show some people who are not affected by this problem, to make them understand what the reason is, why public money should be spent on solving this problem, on not on the different one, because there are so many different stakeholders in the modern world, and somebody should start to connect them. So this what activists and local non-commercial organizations should start with. And as a example, you asked me to refer to, I can say, I can tell this in the short way, tell the story of Petrozavodsk, the city on the north of the, Russia, which was involved into gender inclusive cities program founded by United Nations Trust Fund some years ago. So they started a really big questionnaire for women in the city to understand what is the problem and why they feel unsafety and where. And they found out that there were two biggest reasons for that. First is the lack of lighting in the nighttime, and the second is that many small alcohol shops, like beer shops, were situated near the public transport stations, where women were waiting for the buses and were affected by the people who were going from or to these alcohol shops. Sometimes people were drunk and not controlling themselves, which were causing some tensions and began the reason of very unpleasant situations. And the city government, in a strong communication with non-commercial and activists and civil society, started to make some steps to solve that. And if we talk about lighting, it's absolutely the infrastructure question. You just need to fix it. But in terms of this safety on the bus station, it was not an easy and obvious answer how to solve it. So they started some special trainings program for bus drivers to help them to make them understand how they can be helpful and how they can be involved in watching, like controlling what's going on, not just driving the bus, but be involved into watching the situation and reporting if something happens, or to be helpful in a situation when something is going on inside the bus, to be ready to help and save. So many, if we talk in general, making there are some basic rules to make the city more safe and inclusive place, and in the majority of situations, the good lighting and people awareness and ready to be involved to prevent the conflicts are the really powerful tools to make the city a safer place. I hope that fits your question. Thank you very much. And yeah, Hilola, nice to see you again. I want to ask you about COVID-19. Because even though young people are less likely to show severe symptoms of the virus, if they can get infected, they still be one of the vulnerable groups. And how are you and young people in your university and your friends, how are you guys affected by the crisis, and what you can do and others can do about this to change the situation?
Thank you for your question, Artyom. As far as COVID-19 is concerned, of course, it struck all the world, as well as the part of population, like young population, students of higher education institutions. And in the first turn, So there are many people who have to support themselves. So this is the first issue. And the second issue is that face-to-face learning has transformed to online learning. And this reveals the issue of quality of education between student and communication between student and teachers and professors, and lack of such practice in some institutes. And I would say that we have partially resolved that. First, in collaboration with students and professors, and what can be done by young people is to develop new algorithm to communicate with their professors to get better quality education. And second, what we have already done to create some local young groups of youth, like such students, and just to prevent and to identify explain the risk of disease, maybe to help with the deliveries, to help with food delivery and so on. So, and we have resolved this already. Thank you.
Hilola, Artyom, and all the panelists for your debate. I trust that everybody has found it very interesting to follow. You would know that we had the possibility to also put your questions in on YouTube in the chat, and my UNSCAP colleagues have picked up a few, which I would like to then pose to the panelists in addition to the dialogue that you have had amongst yourselves. The first question comes from Pradeep Day, and it says, how to engage youth in a lifestyle that is sustainable and in sync with ecosystems. This Pradeep hasn't sort of indicated who this question could be asked from. Hilola, would you like to respond, or other panelists who feel strongly about environmental issues? Please go ahead.
That's a very interesting question, and it really affects the future of will people will succeed in involving youth in all this. And I can just mention one of my experiences, because for 5 years I have been doing the program for orphanage, like the group of people, the runners, the city runners. We were doing the weekly trainings with people who were absolutely socially excluded from the society. Like they were taken away from their families and were living in the special houses. I'm sure you know all this system. It existed in Soviet infrastructure and Soviet structures. So we were trying to involve them in sport, but not only in sport, but also trying to make them understand of how the world systematically works, how the complexity works. And one of the practice that which we were doing regularly was the kind of ecological run, which is in some northern European countries is called planking. So it's like when you go for the run in some wilder area and you pick up the garbage that you have. And we met some difficulties to motivate them to do it. And we found the great way to make it is to transform it into the game, into the competition. So it's like when you go for the run, you have 1 hour and you should run as many kilometers as you can, but it's not the main goal. So you win in the race not because of the kilometers, but also because of the amount of garbage that you found on your way to the finish. So the kids in the small teams, they were divided into groups. They were doing the different roads, and picking up the garbage cans, bins, and bags. And I think our champion brought after 1 hour run, they brought about like 24 kilograms of garbage. They found some really, really heavy stuff. And it was a lot of fun. I mean, if you make it fun, if you make it really engaging, if you make it a competition that they want to win, and it really depends of how much trash you will find in the forest, it really helps and gives you this feeling of this is important. But this can work as a great first step in building the capacity of environmental understanding.
That's an excellent example. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Elida, Hilola, I see you on the screen. Would you like to jump in? Then let me move on with the next question. And the next question is actually to Mr. Kurbanov from Otto Alaluusua from Finland. Mr. Kurbanov, social distancing has negative implications on youth social well-being and development. Can UN volunteer program help youth in a form of inclusive social interaction in these times? Over to you, Toili.
Thank you very much, Krista, and thank you for that question. Well, as much as I'd like to say that UNV can solve that problem, we cannot, but we can offer elements of the solution. I mean, social distancing is obviously part of the new normal. And so, by the way, also for the volunteering, the new normal of the volunteering is digital volunteering that enables members of our societies, regardless of their demographics, the age groups, to contribute constructively, productively to the societies. Suffice to say that during the pandemic, working for the United Nations, we have had thousands online volunteers joining the UN system remotely, delivering on various sorts of tasks from data processing, data management, telemedicine, infographics, report writing, and the rest. You know, we live in the 21st century, where the list of location-neutral tasks is growing by day. So today you don't have to be in Almaty or in to work on the urban development in Almaty. You can do as well from another city in Kazakhstan or another place in the world. So that's an element of the solution. But I think looking forward, going forward, we'll look forward working with the partners on exploring on the online volunteering option and creating more opportunities for people, including the youth, to overcome the downsides of the social distancing. Thank you.
Thank you, Toili. Let me then move on to a question from Orhan Bayramov, and this is to Ms. Hilola. As you mentioned, water shortage is available in your country. For example, any measures are being taken in your country? Furthermore, what is done with wastewater? So lots of water questions to you, Hilola. Over to you.
Благодарю за вопрос. По поводу жидких отходов я могу сказать, что у нас на законодательстве.
For this question, in terms of wastewaters, we have special legislation which has all polluters to build up special water treatment facilities, and we hence protecting our water reservoirs where there is constant monitoring over water quality, and in particular special dangerous elements content like heavy metals in water wastes. So we have a whole set of measures to ensure water safety.
Next question is from Nargiz Kulieva to Artyom. What are 3 mega trends that can be expected next 5 years in the urban development in CIS countries? I understand that Nargiz actually works for UNDP Azerbaijan. Artyom, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, I think this is absolutely affordable housing and creating affordable housing, because the now this historical period that is happening now and coming after it is the time when a lot of buildings and houses built in the Soviet Union times are coming to the expiry date, so they become not so appropriate for living anymore, especially for healthy and safe living. So they should be either renovated or like reconstructed, and this is the huge issue on all post-Soviet space in all post-Soviet countries. So I think the second big trend is the digitalization of services and the transport, which takes some like enormous budgets, but sometimes I mean, some services sustain themselves in their business models. For example, food delivery or taxi, and in the cities from like 150,000 people, it can work as a sustainable mechanism, as a sustainable model. And the third trend, that's interesting because I would probably divide it into 2 groups. From what I can see from my position, the huge trend now is coming back to water, city water spaces, water horizons. I mean, the rivers and the lakes situated in the world cities were forgotten for some time. Like in the industrial era of 20th century, they were really polluted, highly polluted for some time. And in the 21st century, in the beginning of 21st century, when people and the governments and city administrations start to pay attention to creating public spaces and to invest in creating public infrastructure, they see that the river banks and like lake banks are the really nice place to be transformed into public space, which creates some extra transport area for pedestrians, cyclists, and creates the place for active living. And yeah, I think developing the river lanes and all this can be the new, like the new point of interest to develop. I would call this Trey.
Thank you, Artyom. I think your point about these sort of old houses of the Soviet time, but even older houses, of course, resonates strongly with me as a UNESCO rep in the region of Central Asia, because we always see, or we often see countries battle, with the need to provide economic development and allow economic development in the cities, but at the same time keep the cities also historically telling the story that they have lived in the past. So and unfortunately, sometimes these old houses and old districts are torn down in the middle in the city centers. because of course the land costs so much there. But at the same time, we believe in UNESCO that these places are often, the best places to live, because they create like little oases in the city center, and we believe that it's important also to keep people in the city centers so that they don't become museum-like empty cities only for sort of big corporations. But it's an interesting discussion that we should probably continue offline. I have one more question from Hasmik, UNICEF Armenia, who is asking the UN and young speakers, but I think it's also pertinent to our guest speaker, Vice Minister of Kazakhstan, about increased use of internet by young people may harm their well-being and be a reason for increased cyberbullying, especially now. So what are your recommendations on how we can address these challenges? Who would like to step in?
Благодарю за вопрос. Действительно, за гибербуллинг, он действительно...
Thank you for your question. Cyberbullying is a problem not only for my country, but in terms of Kazakhstan, I would like to produce several recommendations. Actually, we had a special expert meeting on cyberbullying, and we made several recommendations. First of all, we are talking about the situation when students are vulnerable to internet bullying due to the fact that they are placing some photographs, their own photographs, and they could be also a situation when they share more personal private data in the internet, and they haven't seen differences in terms of private and public spheres in the internet. But we try to explain them that once you are in the internet, no matter how aged you are becoming a subject in the virtual space. And hence, we are working with the educators, because before, when you were in offline, educators realized that once, on the one hand, you are a public individual, but at the same time, you are limited by the class walls, class environment. But now, when educators recording lessons and demonstrate through the internet, that means that this educator is exposed at maximum level to publicity. Same is true for the students when they're using social networks or other services. They could be also in the situation of cyberbullying when due to wrong perception of the images they offer, the reaction could be negative on behalf of other users of the internet. We this summer provided summer schools for educators, which is about ethics in social networks during lockdown and distance learning. It is very important to understand internet ethics. We realize that this should be part of professional ethics. And if educators made something wrong to their students, that means that these educators will be blamed for breaching professional ethics. And secondly, we are focusing on the parents in terms of noticing what kind of resources they have, what they have in the internet, what kind of posts they put into the cyberspace, and they have to understand that no matter what they would publish, this information would automatically becomes public. And we need to to protect our children. We have a committee for children's right protection. So we are very active in this area, and we know that big space remains there for our interventions against cyberbullying. Thank you. Thank you.
Add just a few things.
No, absolutely.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to add that there is some responsibility on digital corporations as well, especially social media corporations like Twitter and YouTube and Facebook, in order to provide clear child-friendly guides on tools in which they can use to prevent abuse. And I also believe parents and teachers also have a responsibility to prepare guidelines for children or to clearly explain them on how they can prevent abuses like this or how they can report. So I guess it's a job for multiple stakeholders. Just wanted to quickly add.
Absolutely. And I know that many UN agencies have also worked on this issue, including UNESCO. And we have some guidance that we can share also, perhaps, so we can post on the ESCAP panel post so to be shared. And in addition, we also have, we are promoting a concept of media and information literacy. And this is a concept that sort of combines the user's knowledge about how media functions so that they can relate more carefully to the sources of information that is now, available everywhere in abundance, and that they can also engage with through ICTs in a very sort of cautious manner and in a more sort of conscious manner, so that they wouldn't fall victim to cyberbullying. But I will be happy to share also these resources after the panel. Dear panelists, our time is over. I should very much like to thank you for this very interesting engagement and enriching exchanges. I think that we have pretty much touched upon, though briefly, on different aspects relating to SDG, but also these challenges that have been posed by the COVID-19 pandemic, starting from education, environmental issues, gender issues, young people's empowerment, social services and innovations. How can we make our cities more livable and human-centered? How to address inequalities and disparities. So thank you so much for this 2 hours that we spent together. We will now give the floor to the Master of Ceremony for some announcements, and then I think we will start with a new session pretty soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Krista. Thank you very much to all the speakers. This indeed was a very, very interesting discussion that took us, as Krista mentioned, into all kind of directions. But indeed, since it is about the future we want, and all aspects of our future are important to discuss and they're interlinked, it has been very interesting to follow this discussion into all directions. I would just like to make 3 brief housekeeping announcements. First of all, as you maybe remember from the video in the beginning of the session, there is this global UN survey, UN 75, which you can join. And I know that hundreds of thousands of young people, or all people actually, have already joined this survey. And we will be posting right now the link to the survey again in YouTube chat. It only takes 1 minute to complete, but it adds your voice to the future you want in a global discussion. So please fill out that survey. Secondly, also we have our own survey about the session. So we would like to know from you whether you liked it or not, so we can improve our meetings in the future. So please also, the link is being posted in YouTube, and for registered participants, you will also receive this evaluation questionnaire by email. Kindly fill it out. And lastly, please join us for session 2B this afternoon, where we will hear from governments, regional organizations, and NGOs how progress on SDGs actually looks like and how it is reported by countries to the global level, and how everybody in society is involved in creating these reports, and how to make this process happen also during these very challenging times of COVID-19. So please join us this afternoon. For this, you will receive a new YouTube link, and the session will start at 15:30 Almaty time. Once again, thanks so very much to the speakers, to the moderator. What an absolutely inspiring session. Thank you.